Look, you're making me look bad, and if you can't get the job done, I'll find someone else who will.
The bully is perhaps more crass. It's an individual who might start out using the conning techniques and manipulative techniques, but when they don't get their way, they tend to escalate a little and start using dominance and force to get what they want.
Oh, hey, it's the truth. I mean, it's good that there's people like you around here, not like certain people.
And the puppet master is really the master of them all. That's an individual who has the wide repertoire of psychopathic traits, but what makes them so interesting is they get other people to do their dirty work. So the puppet master pulls the strings on a small group of individuals who are loyal to him or her. Well, I do give talks to business groups, and occasionally an individual during a break will come up and say, you know, that I'd like to hire people with some of these traits.
Such corporate predators are often referred to as successful psychopaths.
And I'd say successful in what respect? They've screwed a lot of people. They've ruined tens of thousands of lives, right? They make decisions that impact upon a whole society. And they do this without any particular concern, remorse, no empathy for the population.
Impressive.
And they do it without any risk to themselves.
It was very much a heads we win, tails you lose type of argument, because no matter what they do, at the end of the day, they're not playing with their own money. They're not betting their own money, and they're not betting their own bonuses or resources or careers even.
Coming up, psychopathic behavior doesn't end with the workday. Those traits go home, from the boardroom to the bedroom.
In normal relationships, sex is bonding. I mean, that's how we're wired. We connect to, you know, our sexual partner, except that experience is not happening on the other end with him.
You look fantastic.
Thank you, so do you.
Oh, thank you.
The psychopath knows how to project an aura of power, status, and excitement. He's driven to get whatever he sets his sights on, and when the object of his desire is a woman, he is a master of seduction.
These men are anything but boring, and the women find that extremely attractive. His power, his dominance, his success in life. The beginning of the relationship, very whirlwind, very love bombing, lots of gifts, money, trips, attention, sex, whatever. And so the intensity of that is like no other.
Sandra Brown has studied how psychopaths lure their victims. A counselor and author of the book Women Who Love Psychopaths, she's seen the pattern time and time again. It starts with targeting the right woman. As one psychopath admitted,
he said, I throw a hook out for empathy. And depending on how they respond to that is whether I will pursue it. There's no use going there if she doesn't take the bait. And so that's how they'll test the waters.
I really want you to come next weekend to my dad's 60th.
While psychopaths themselves have no empathy, they're masterful playing the sympathy card whenever it's needed.
I was abused as a child. You're the only one that I could have told this to. I've never felt this way before. You're the only one that's keeping me off drugs and alcohol. You're the strength that I need in order to climb the career ladder at my job. They just find what works in terms of tapping into the empathy within the women.
Another powerful tool in the psychopath arsenal is sex. Some theorize they have such a high sex drive because it's a physiological act that allows the psychopath to feel something. Sandra Brown thinks there's more to it.
Most of the women have not had that level of hypersexuality, and the psychopath often has a reduced need for sleep, high need for stimulation, reduced need for sleep. And so the early parts of the relationship can be what we call marathon sex. There's a release of oxytocin, the sex hormone, which creates a sensation of bonding and also of trust.
Once hooked, the psychopath works quickly to reel in his victim, moving in with her, proposing marriage, all in a heady rush before the mask starts to slip. That's just what happened to a woman we'll call Elaine, after a whirlwind romance with a man she thought was her soulmate. Out of concern for her safety and her children, we have concealed her identity.
It was like being hypnotized. He would just gaze into my eyes and just have that intensity that there was no one else in the room but us. He seemed very charming. We had a lot of the same interests. We wanted to go camping, hiking, ballroom dancing. He seemed to value being a family man, a father, and wanted to have children, which was really what I wanted too. I wanted to have someone to share my life with. And I had hoped I was able to make that dream come true with him. In my mind, I had hoped that I could be dancing with him until we were in our golden years.
And then there were the revelations about his miserable childhood.
He was the youngest of a family of 8, and that how cruel his father was to him, and that his mom never had time for him. I just sensed this was a very sad and lonely soul, and I could feel that sadness in his heart, and I wanted to help share my love and understanding with him, and just to help him have a brighter future.
But there were warning signs that not all his stories were true. She discovered he wasn't single after all, but he assured her a divorce was imminent. Despite some nagging doubts, Elaine agreed to marry him. That's when everything changed.
I didn't matter to him in the same way now that he, in a sense, had me, now that we were married. And just like the thrill was off, he was the hunter and he had caught the prey, and he would get angry at the slightest thing. And we ended up, all of us in the house, we felt we were walking on eggshells around him. For instance, if someone just spilled some juice, he would hit the ceiling.
Her new husband became cold and distant, spending hours on the computer. And one day, she found out why.
He sort of laughed it off and said, "Oh, I'm just seeing what's out there." He could look you in the eye and lie, and yet, it just didn't even blink. He didn't faze him one bit. He was just a master at twisting the facts, twisting information.
Soon after, she says, he began hurting their children.
He tripped our little boy, and then he smirked. Those types of when he was just learning to walk, I think that he really enjoyed that. But I remember I would look and then just be shocked by that brief moment where the mask dropped. Who am I with? Who is this person? And it does feel like he's a total stranger. It made me feel like I was going crazy.
As his angry outbursts escalated, so did her fear. On one occasion, the brakes on Elaine's car failed.
I guess something could happen to your brakes, but at the same time, was he trying to hurt me? Was he hoping that I would get into an accident?
Desperate for help, she went to see a counselor. His words were chilling.
Your husband is a psychopath, and that his behavior, that he will always behave that way. They can't change. This is hardwired in them. And that's what's so hard to understand. It's like if someone has a disease or an illness, that will be with them.
Elaine filed for divorce, ending her 2.5-year marriage.
They hurt their partners financially, physically, emotionally, sexually, spiritually. And to me, that's the worst on your very soul. That it is so devastating.
Marriage to a psychopath can be a nightmare. But what happens when the psychopath is your own child? Experts now believe it's possible to identify psychopathic tendencies in children as young as 3. Callous, unemotional traits and lack of guilt about wrongdoing are the hallmarks. Red flags Doug Kirk and his wife tried to ignore in their son. The problems started in his early teens.
He would borrow my bike, and then it wouldn't come back, and I'd say, "What happened to it?" He said, "It was stolen." Well, turns out it wasn't stolen. He just pawned it.
The pattern repeated itself. Tools would go missing. Stories concocted that eventually were discovered to be lies. Even though Kirk has a degree in psychology, he didn't know then what his son was. By the time he was 19, he became a master of manipulation.
He's handsome, tall, charming, intelligent, so no problem getting a job. But he wouldn't last more than a few weeks because he'd start stealing from people or lying to them, and they'd fire him. You have kids, You love them, you want them to be successful.
Like many psychopaths, Kirk's son saw an opportunity to capitalize on the financial crisis. So 9 years later, his son called him out of the blue with a business proposition.
There were hundreds of boats being repossessed down in the States. You know, the economy was just in terrible shape. But if you bought them right, you could still sell them up here. So he suggested, you know, if I had a few boats over the winter time that I could work on and get cleaned up and deal with whatever mechanical issues with it, then I'd have inventory to sell in the spring. And I think I could do pretty well at it. And I bet.
In the end, his own son took him for $300,000. Kirk is convinced there is nothing anyone can do to change or treat a psychopath. It's taken him a lifetime to understand that.
And I still love him. He's my son. But you have to be realistic and you have to face facts. And you don't have to be duped time after time after time like I was.
When we return, going inside the brain of a psychopath.
You have brains that seem to be hypersensitive to reward, brains that seem to be undersensitive to the suffering of others. You know, this is the picture of psychopathy, right? So this is a brain of someone who is very dangerous.
So does anybody recognize these lovely individuals up here on the screen?
These psychopaths may be notorious, but what science is still trying to unravel is the mystery of their minds. How does the psychopath think? How does he react? That's what UBC forensic psychologist Dr. Stephen Porter is trying to discover. A key experiment, how the psychopath goes about selecting his victim.
It's very much like watching a lion looking for the weakest gazelle. And very much premeditated, very carefully sort of planned out antisocial behavior, and ultimately preying on the individual in whatever way they might desire.
In an experiment using facial expressions, psychopaths could accurately detect fear in people from a very young age. Porter's colleague at UBC Kelowna, Dr. Michael Woodworth.
We expected across the board they'd have trouble recognizing the different emotions due to their emotional deficits. We found that they did actually better at recognizing fearful faces, suggesting that even at quite an early age, they are already starting to engage in a sort of predatory-like thinking where they're able to pick out certain individuals or see cues in their environment that would suggest this might be somebody that they could have as a victim.
Neuroscience also offers clues as to what might be going on in a psychopath's brain. At the University of Wisconsin, Dr. Mike Koenigs uses an MRI scanner to compare the brains of normal subjects with those of psychopaths in prison.
So there's a specific circuit very deep in the brain that is responsive to essentially anything that we find innately pleasurable. So things like money, drugs, sex, chocolate. When you look at a psychopathic brain's response to reward, what we find is that the more psychopathic the individual is, the stronger that this area of the brain lights up to reward, called the amygdala, primary sort of fear center of the brain. And another circuit of the brain that we know to be responsible for empathy, for the regulation of emotion, for motivating pro-social behavior, for regulating our moral judgments, we also see some degraded connections in that circuit of the brain.
There is reduced connectivity between these two areas of the brain, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The primitive emotions of fear and pleasure-seeking weren't being moderated by the brain's executive power center.
You have brains that seem to be hypersensitive to reward, brains that seem to be undersensitive to the suffering of others. You know, this is the picture of psychopathy, right? So this is a brain of someone who is very dangerous.